Let me ask you about book covers. How much do you think it affects sales? I mean, are you fixated on book covers?
Yes. A good cover, a bad cover is going to kill your sales. Even if you are the best, unless you're one of a handful of people that people would buy, Stephen King has written the phone book. They're going to pick it up because it has Stephen King on it. If that's not your name, then the book cover matters. I can't tell you, and then even if you do have a name, there's a reason why publishing houses rotate book covers frequently, or they will have one cover in the US and a different cover in Europe. The first thing we see and we get drawn to is the visual imagery before we see the name. So if you are, and I mean, obviously bookstore sales are less important than they used to be. It still feels good to have your book sitting on the shelf at Barnes and Noble, um, but Amazon is the 800-pound gorilla. That's where the vast majority of book sales happen. That's where you're going to make your living. It's always nice and feels good to see it on the bookshelf. That's a good ego boost. It's proof of a certain level of success as a writer, but it's your main thing is Amazon. So your book cover has to both look good in print in front of you and as a thumbnail. It has to look good in this one little, tiny 1-inch box. So image design is hugely important.
I want to ask what advice you would give to people for book cover design, but of course you write both fiction and nonfiction. Maybe you can split off those two different areas.
So I'll start with fiction books. In fiction books, you want a cover that's going to reflect the spirit of the story, the emotion they're going to get from it. It's not necessarily as important to show the big clenching scene or something like that from the book. That's still good. It can be effective. But for example, Home Summonings, the first trilogy, the Winter trilogy, the face on there is very ethereal looking. It's just a woman's face, very ethereal, but it's a very striking look, and it stops people. They stop and look at that cover every time before they look at the name, before they look at the title, anything else. They see that face, and it looks fantastic, both as a thumbnail and as the major known killer, because everybody looks at and picks up. They're like, "Is this epic fantasy?" I'm like, "No, it's 3 novels in an omnibus." But that cover is very striking. Um, so you want something that's going to convey and be striking. It's going to draw attention, and it's going to convey the spirit of the story. So, and that's a lot to do in a single image, but there's that old story, a picture's worth 1,000 words. If you do the right image, and the minor details have a huge influence. I'll give you a perfect example. We were just working on a cover for somebody that is a historical romance, that the color of the dress was extraordinarily important, and the shade of the dress, and whether or not you saw this shading and imagery and how much detail you can see. But it was not only that, it was what's the font. Because even if we're not conscious about it, different genres tend to be in specific fonts. How big a person's name is hugely influential. You know, is it at the top or the bottom? Is the title at the top or the bottom? Is there a series title there? There's all these little details, and this is why I don't design my own book covers, because I suck at it. I have a number of designers I work with, depending on what it is, that do me a fantastic job. So I've done my own covers and they sucked, but generally, if I've done my own covers, it was either something I needed to get out the door as a placeholder. Now, for nonfiction, I can do a better cover. I still don't do my own covers. Now, for a nonfiction cover, it's a little bit different because, for example, and I had this conversation earlier today. I was in a networking call where I held up the Business Essentials for Writers, and the first thing that somebody came and said was, "There's a typewriter on that. Does that hit a certain genre?" And I said, "Well, we actually piloted a number of different covers, one of which was a laptop and a typewriter back to back. Seeing a laptop on the cover invokes a lot of very broad, very generic images. Seeing a typewriter still holds very much something in the zeitgeist, and it elicits that idea of being a writer. even if you've never clicked a key on a manual typewriter, it still holds something in that image.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so other covers that I've done for nonfiction, you know, if you've done something for nonfiction that evokes because again, even for nonfiction, even for something that is a very technical book, for something that is very specific like that, that is not necessarily about the emotion, there's still an emotion tied to it. There's still a reason you're going to pick up even one programming language book versus another.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the O'Reilly books, they have a very specific aesthetic. If you look at the For Dummies series of books, they have a very specific aesthetic. And so part of that is you know what you're going to get in terms of a quality out of it because of the publisher, and the cover tells you that. But then again, if you are writing, for example, in a consulting space, in a technology book that has a very techno picture on it can be really good and really effective.
Mm-hmm.
If you are writing a techno book that has a very etheric look on it, that's a crapshoot, because again, this goes back to knowing not only what's the book, what's the purpose, whose attention do you want to draw? Because again, the main purpose of a cover is whose attention do I want to get?
Mm-hmm. Related to book covers is, of course, book titles. How much do you think that affects sales, and how much effort do you put into the working up of a title? Is it a struggle, or do you agonize over it?
I've got books that have been retitled because the first title, the image may have worked, the title didn't. One series I wrote, we actually retitled all of them after the third book because they were all bad puns. I was having fun with it. It was something that
okay.
if you looked at it, it elicited something. But when we did the first round of recovers, we changed it. It went from this very art style, because the covers were being done as a charcoal sketch that was then scanned and digitally inked. Loved those covers. They were a lot of fun. They elicited one very specific emotion to them. Well, when we redid the covers, had a long conversation and we also retitled the books at that point. Now, when you open it up, you'll see book 1, Pandora's Curse, or also known as, we show those titles so that it's not hidden.
Oh.
It's on the Amazon stuff. It's not a hidden thing of, oh, you bought it under this title, you're going to buy it under that title as well. You don't want to do something like that feels deceptive. But one title will attract a certain audience, and another title is just like the imagery, because the language becomes important. We are writers after all. So the kitsch of the title can be the thing that grabs people and pulls them in or pushes them away. And so there's a lot of work that goes into a good title. And so sometimes we want to be too kitschy. So for example, the Business Essentials for Books Writer, I went through about 100 different titles before we finally settled on something that simple that said, this is what you get out of the book. It's business basics. And it's written specifically in language and structure for writers in the publishing industry. And it got down to being that clear and that basic.
Okay. Do you have any advice for maybe an author they finished their novel and they're agonizing over a title? And say it's fiction.
If you're agonizing over the title, the first thing I always suggest is having some friends you can talk about things with. And it also depends on how you're planning to publish. If you're planning to go traditionally published, you may not really wind up having a choice in what the final title is.
Yeah.
You may have put a title on there, but when you send that off to a publisher, plan for that to be a placeholder. Depending on the size of the publisher, they may look at you and go, that's ridiculous. Other times, if you are publishing the book yourself, if you're going through and doing the indie publishing route, you have complete control. That is both a wonderful thing and a curse, because if anybody screws it up, it was you.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's your choice. So if you're trying to agonize over a title, write about 100 titles out there. Good, bad, ugly, indifferent. Just keep writing titles until you don't have another bad idea in mind. And then you can start paring that down, because at some point, one of them or two of them or three of them are going to grab you, and you're going to say, that conveys the emotion and the essence of the story. And again, Nobody's Business. That's a gnome, it's a novel about the gnomes and everything else and the murder mystery.
Mm-hmm.
It took a while to come up with that title. I knew I wanted something that was going to be bad and a little bit punny, because that kind of ties to the story.
Okay.
But went through about, I don't know, probably 50 or 60 iterations, and I put a few of them out in front of people, and I said, which one do you like?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the one we settled down on.
Okay.
If you can't make that final decision, never be afraid to ask other people to take a look.
Mm-hmm.